where should you actually start? So in the first poll, we obviously highlighted some areas of weakness that might need addressing. So in this section, we're going to run through how you might approach some of those issues. And we're going to do this through a 4-step process. So if we click on, you'll be able to see that on screen. And for each step, we're going to highlight a couple of ways to approach it. So a basic starting position and a more advanced and sophisticated approach. So hopefully that will, suit different internal appetites for change, budgets, capabilities, etc. Now, this is normally the section, if we're in person, we'd be getting quite hands-on and running a few sort of interactive workshops. So obviously we're going to just talk over principles here. But hopefully, if there's any questions or you want to get a little bit more detail on these, then, please do follow up with us after this session. So going on to the next slide, we'll look at the first area, which is quantifying the situation. And what I mean by that is using your own data to understand where issues might be and how costly they are. Now, this stage is really important for focusing minds. And if it comes to it, this sort of insight can actually be really crucial in creating business cases for change. So as a starting point on the left-hand side there, we'd recommend looking at attrition through simple data analytics and conversion rates across your pipeline. Now, descriptive analytics, so really quite basic analysis of this is great starting place to see how many people you have at the top of the funnel and where and when those numbers decrease. Now, this can highlight areas for further investigation, but it's also worth looking over on the right-hand side now about thinking about external benchmarks, and when looking at these rates, how do they compare to peer groups, competitor groups, or even the wider sector? It's also possible to do a bit more sophisticated analysis with your in-house data, so using machine learning models and regression analysis. If you've ever heard me talk a case event in the past, I bang on about this all the time. So apologies, I could do this in and I have done in a full hour session, but I'm going to condense this down. So what we can do with more statistical analysis of data is look at conversion rates in a slightly different way and how they apply for different audience segments. And it can really unearth some hidden truths. So where on the face of it, for example, a touch point doesn't have any issues at an aggregated level, as you start to break that down for a particular audience group, it could be a real weak point. But the real value is actually moving analysis on from just quantifying what's happening to enabling you to predict when individuals are at greater risk of dropping out. And that can be based on both the demographic or behavior profiles. So, for example, it can tell you that if you think about a particular audience segment, it might be that if they engage in 3 touch points, their conversion rate will be 30%. But if they miss one of those touch points, it will drop to 10%. So it can help you better understand the value of different touch points and, importantly, how they intersect and interact with each other. So again, go back to the earlier point of understanding the full holistic journey. There can be significant influence from different touch points, which we wouldn't necessarily expect. So that analysis is a great starting point and can drive value. But on its own, it won't help you meet customer needs effectively. So to do that effectively, you need to start looking at primary research and first-party feedback and qualitative insights. This will help you understand true perceptions and experiences of your audiences. So as a starting point, again, on the left-hand side, you can do this through simple online surveys for broad segments. So for example, first years reflecting on their applicant experience, or second years reflecting on their first year experience. But just be sure to ask the right questions, because this is different to your standard admission survey. You need to establish some quantitative metrics, and remember, you need to understand touch points, what those interactions were, the experience at each one of those touch points, and the importance of that touch point and the impact it had on their journey. To take this a step further, we'd also, and always recommend that you enhance with qualitative feedback as well to understand the why of what's going on. And to undertake all the analysis on a more segmented basis as well. So ideally using segments defined by behaviour that better reflect the audience rather than reflect your internal structures. So for example, you're more likely to find common journeys and experiences across individuals who share the same motivations and behaviours than you will individuals who want to study the same subject. Back to Tim.
Thanks a lot, Ed. So following on from understanding the customer experience, the next stage is to build out the journey maps. So with all of the insight gleaned from the qual and quant that Ed was describing, all of that work, journey maps can be developed with the immediate team involved. And at the basic level, so the left-hand side, this can be segmented at study level across all UG or PG. If we just look at the right-hand side and consider a more advanced position, these maps can be more widely co-created across stakeholder groups, and you can involve other teams outside of marketing, like IT, operations, facilities, academic representatives. And you'll begin to discover touch points are complex and involve many stakeholders, but by bringing them on board early in the process will help to drive more positive culture change moving forward. The segmentation approach can also be based on behavioural options like personas to gain an even deeper level of journey enrichment and understanding touch points from a persona-specific perspective. If we just move on to the next slide, we have an example, and Ed showed the top half of this earlier, of a very top level student map. And this shows the average experience rating across key touch points like requesting a prospectus through to attending an open day. The experience score is mapped against the level of importance of the touch point. And so simplistically on this map as an example, the importance of, say, a follow-up email after downloading a prospectus is scored high, but the actual experience of that touch point is rated poorly. So this is what we could identify as a moment that matters, high importance but low experience rating. The next slide shows a very detailed map. And it doesn't matter that you can't see the detail in here, but it's a fairly typical map that often includes around 40 to 50 different touch points, from awareness to application, enrolment to starting study. This is what can be enriched further, and you'll often find 10 to 15 priority moments that matter identified across the map. And on this example, sort of the middle coloured column are the squares that are highlighted red in the middle. So it's great that we've got all of this understanding, and just moving on to the next slide. The fourth stage is about finding meaning and taking action. So at a basic level, it's about making sense of these priorities and making that insight actionable, which is something that you can do through design thinking. The starting point is to identify and agree those moments that matter as a group, and then prioritize the ones that you want to focus on. A more advanced approach could be to develop a strategic roadmap of priorities and phase the experience areas you want to improve as part of a wider experience strategy. And an effective way of doing this is through setting up cross-functional working groups to look at developing those innovative approaches to designing new and enhanced touch points. You can also provide a really nice opportunity to use that wider stakeholder group that you've engaged with earlier to help in the process and gain further buy-in from their teams and departments. You can use the work as an opportunity to present far and wide across the institution. And really, the more internal awareness with this type of work you can do, the greater the impact it will have. And finally, in order for any student journey strategy to be successful, it needs to be continuously monitored and developed. If you developed an experience strategy in January, for instance, it would be certainly need some refinement by now. So you always need to consider what will impact you and change as you need to. And if we just move on to the last slide in this section, this image just visualizes the entire four-stage process we've described. And I think the most important takeaway from here is that experience and improvement will always evolve and change, with this year being a very extreme example of that. To be experience-led, continuous improvement driven by insight and data is key, along with ongoing stakeholder engagement. And I think doing both of these things will keep you delivering not only really excellent student experience, but also help to drive positive culture change at your institution. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide, and I'll just leave you with a few final thoughts. So first and foremost, we've been really happy to be here, and we really hope you found this session useful, and you can see why now more than ever there is an opportunity to put the student journey front and centre of your priorities. And if we were to summarise, and we can just move on to the next slide, from what we've been presenting, the key areas would be that, when you're looking at all of the elements that make up the student journey, focus on the experience and how it can be improved. Take a holistic view and don't focus on areas in isolation. Key touch points are complex and will involve many people. Involve them and bring them on board with you. plan for the future and uncertainty. We know there are going to be more challenges ahead of us, but use your experience of the last 9 months to take the good innovations and positive changes forward. Focus on the key touch points and prioritize them. Improving experience won't happen overnight, and it needs to be done continuously. Make a difference in the areas that matter most, and phase your activity as part of the strategic roadmap or an overall experience strategy. Engage your stakeholders and make sure they're on board with you. With this, you can help drive positive culture, you can help break down silos, and you can encourage a culture of collaboration. And finally, make a difference. You can be a shining light. You can be a shining light for improvement and improving experience of your students, and be central to driving that positive change we've been talking about. So with that, we've really enjoyed being with you this afternoon and sharing this presentation with you. As an agency, we have a lot of experience doing this type of work for many institutions. So if any of you are interested in having a chat with me or Ed to find out more, please do contact you. A bit of a plug, I also highlighted a few points in the presentation, some online distance learning research that we've been working on. We have a white paper available next week, so if anyone is interested in receiving this and finding out more about the ODL market in the UK, let me know and I can send you the white paper next week. It really is a very interesting piece of research. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand back over to Ed, who's just going to wrap things up.
Cheers, Tim. Thanks. And actually, in that final wrap up, we have a final poll. So if you don't mind launching that, Emily, what we want to do is just, based on everything you've heard today, get a sense of, if you had to commit to something and we had to push you on that, what would be the first thing you focus on to overcome the challenges that you have? Now, this could be, directly in line with that first poll and the big weaknesses that you have, or potentially something else has come to light through a session where you think, actually, yeah, that should be my first priority. Okay, so a limited amount in the front end of understanding audiences and experience, and a pretty equal split on the final ones. So looking more at data and understanding conversion rates. Speaking of intern, of course, was the major challenge up front. And also just, getting on with it, which is actually great to see, start redesigning those touch points. So if you've got all that insight up front, potentially need a little bit more around conversion rates to help you with prioritization, but just start thinking about how can we change things. And my advice there, and to that second to last point around speaking to internal teams, collaborate as much as possible, and that co-creation of maps that Tim's talking about, to understand the interdependencies of the roles that different teams and departments play, is absolutely critical. And then setting in place those cross-functional working groups to make sure that, yes, we can make change now, but we need to build something sustainable for the future and continue to drive that change. Great. Okay, well, that's it for me. I'm conscious of time as well, so I'd like to get on to any questions if there are any.
Oh, can I start with the question? Do you mind? Is that okay? Obviously, if there's any more, then please, let's go for it. I'm just interested in your thoughts, Ed and Tim. Obviously, this throughout this period, we've all we've pivoted to everything being digital and being online. And I just wonder, thinking about that customer experience, customer journey, what do you think the role will be in the future for the sort of digital as well as the face-to-face or in-person events? Do you think there's just going to be more of everything, or there's going to be more of a slant towards digital, or that face-to-face is just going to have a huge bounce back? Any thoughts on that?
I think there'll be I wouldn't be surprised if there's a massive rush to get back to face-to-face, because people will miss it. But I hope what will happen is people realise that, over the last 9 months, we've kind of put sticky plasters on everything and quickly fixing things to improve them and make them better. And actually, rip that, sorry for this horrible metaphor, when we start to rip some of those sticky plasters off, actually they might hurt a little bit. We might realise that some of those quick fixes were quite good. So I think what we'll end up with is the digital and the virtual stuff certainly won't go away. I think we're at a point in evolution there where, we've stopped trying to replicate the face-to-face in digital, and actually we're just putting more focus into more effective content hubs, really. Asynchronous content, you know, available completely on demand. And Tim mentioned the Derby on demand one from University of Derby. You know, it's great. Have a look at it if you've not looked at it. Really nice user experiences. But I think ultimately what that will come down to is we'll carry on doing both, but we'll find better integration and understanding between the two of how they can both benefit each other.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thanks, Ed. I can't see any hands, so maybe it's just my screen. Has anybody else got any questions for Ed or for Tim?
I see a few in there around contacting Tim for the white paper.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So we've completed the white paper today. So we carried out a significant bit of research into the online distance learning market in the UK, and we've condensed a big report into a white paper, which we're going to put out next week. So I think Rich has shared my email. So if anyone's interested in getting hold of that, I can email that to you next week. But it's a really interesting read.
And I guess no one else can see this, but I have got a private chat to me. Got my lovely tree from, so I don't know. Sorry, my wife bought it. I don't know. I'll try and find out.
It is very nice. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I'm going to hand over to Rich in just a moment, but just like to say thanks ever so much to Ed and to Tim for sharing these insights and thoughts and your analysis of the student journey. It's been really, really helpful and certainly given me lots to take away from today. Thank you. I'll hand you over to Rich.